College with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. It is Monday. It's Thanksgiving week. It's Virginia Tech week. It's a lot of stuff going on this week. I'm Chris Graham. We'll have Jerry Carter on the podcast with us to help us get ready for this momentous week in Virginia sports. And when I say Virginia, I mean Commonwealth of Virginia, but I mean University of Virginia. I mean Virginia Tech. Boy, this is the week that, you know, even though Virginia hasn't won this game, Jerry, since 2003, this is still a big week for me. It's a big week for my Hokie brethren across the aisle, if you want to say, because, you know, you look forward to this game every year. Tech has won it the last 15 years, but this year, much bigger stakes than we've had in a long time. Winner on Friday goes to play Clemson and Charlotte, and likely is going to be the Orange Bowl representative from the ACC. So there's no other way to frame this podcast. There's a lot else going on, but that is hanging over everything this week.
It's kind of interesting, Chris, because when we started in the preseason for the football, we both talked about how we felt pretty comfortable in saying that UVA was going to be making the trip to Charlotte. We felt it was inevitable that they were going to be playing Clemson when they got there. But I would be lying, Chris, if I said I thought that the opponent they'd have to get past to get there would be Virginia Tech. Then, if you find anybody to say they thought it would be Virginia Tech after the Virginia Tech Duke game, they're lying. So it's a really unique situation, and I know we're going to take a deep dive into this game, but I want to say one thing right off the bat, and again, kudos to Bud Foster. So happy for him. You know, you spend that many years in the number 2 seed, maybe the 1A seed, I'm not sure. He's going to be done at the end of the year, and his defenses have been young / inexperienced. But for them to come back and post back-to-back shutouts in the 2 weeks leading up to this game, I couldn't be happier for the defensive side of the ball. And if you're going to go out, we talked at length about whether he's really done. Is he going to, just hang around and be a handshaker? But if that is the case, what a way to go out with back-to-back goose eggs leading up to this big game.
And even the Wake Forest game 3 games ago at least, where they gave up 17, they held them scoreless for the last 24-32. I think it was 9-32 when Wake scored early second half of that game, and then Tech held that Wake team to 301 yards total offense. At that time, Wake was averaging over 500 yards per game offensively, and so that was a heck of an effort. And whether this is the end for him completely, I still doubt that, or if it's just the end for him in Virginia Tech, and either he gets another job for next year, takes a year off, gets another job somewhere else, and he's 60 years old. I just can't imagine, especially the way he's coaching now. After the Duke game, I don't think Virginia Tech fans could have let him go soon enough as far as how things were going for Virginia Tech this season. After that loss, they were 2-2, and they weren't good offensively. They weren't good defensively. Tech fans could have thrown the whole coaching staff out and wouldn't have cared a bit. But yeah, the both sides of the ball, but the defense. Man, 301 yards against Wake Forest. The effort against Georgia Tech, I think, was 134 yards, around 200 yards against Pitt this past weekend. Probably even more impressive that they that they held Pitt the way they did. I know it was a driving rainstorm. I know it was cold. It was the same for both sides, and Virginia Tech scored 28 in that game. So yeah, Bud, let's just assume this is the end, because, and even though I don't think it is, he's going out on a lot better terms than Frank Beamer did, and Beamer deserved better too. But Beamer's last 4 teams, they were right around 500. They were struggling to get into bowls, and this Virginia Tech team is 8-3. They're 5-2 in the ACC. The defense is the key. It feels like old times in Blacksburg, and so yeah, good for Bud that he's going out the way he is.
Yeah, I want to add you mentioned you weren't sure if the fan base wanted to keep them after the Duke game. I wasn't sure the fan base wanted to keep them after halftime of the Duke game. It was, Chris, I can't remember a time in recent ACC football history that a team did this level of a turnaround mid-season.
Yeah.
we talked about the fact that when they're 2-2, they had just gotten spanked at home. Their wins were incredibly unimpressive. We were wondering if, Fuentes is within the same level of trouble as Taggart was. If you were going to, let's say you bump into somebody at a local coffee shop tomorrow morning, and they say, Chris, what's up with these Hokies? Let the listeners know how you think that they got to the 5-2, 8-3, identical marks for the Who's and the Hokies going in. How would you explain to the average person what the Hokies did here the back half of the season?
The local media here, when I say local, I mean like this, the Virginia media, not just local for me where I live in Waynesboro, Stanton, but, the statewide media who covers Virginia Tech, I think is putting a little too much emphasis on the more personal part of it, which is, and I think there is an element of this, but Justin Fuente has acknowledged that after that Duke game, he apologized to his team. He said, look, I didn't prepare you for this game. You were not ready to play this game in any way, shape, or form. You weren't ready schematically. You weren't ready emotionally. I didn't have you prepared to play this game against Duke. And he said that was a big admission. He said he's never done that as a coach, whether as an assistant coach or as a head coach, to say basically, this isn't on you, this is on me. A lot of times coaches will throw it out there and say the players weren't ready, et cetera, et cetera. They won't necessarily say that to the media, but they'll say that. But he said, no, this was on me. This is on me, and I didn't do my job. And so I vow that I will do my job, and I will get you ready. Me and my coaching staff, we will get you ready for future games. That's where it's all been attributed from. The people I'm reading. That's all they'll say. That's all they're saying is that he acknowledged that, and now they're better. There were some important changes, though, that were made schematically. Okay, so now we'll talk about that side. The first was that the starting quarterback going into the season and through the first few games of the season was Ryan Willis, the transfer from Kansas. He started all last season. And Willis is the prototypical sort of Justin Fuente quarterback. Fuente made his name on his way up the ladder from assistant coach to head coach as a quarterback's coach. He was quarterback's coach at TCU. One of his pupils was Andy Dalton. Paxton Lynch at Memphis was his next pupil, as he was head coach at Memphis, groomed him to become a first-round NFL draft pick as a quarterback, and so he's got a reputation of using big guys with big arms, and that's what the offense is built around. And through the first 4 games of this year, he still was running the way Justin Fuente offenses run, and big quarterback, big arm, but it wasn't working. And so the backup is somebody that the fan base has been saying for a couple of years, a guy named Hendon Hooker, who is more of a mobile quarterback, more of a running quarterback, to be honest. When I say mobile, you can be mobile and still be a stand back in the pocket and throw the ball kind of guy, but you're just maybe more mobile than a 6'7", 260-pound guy. Hooker's got a good arm, but he's definitely a guy that he's better when you use him. Not just to kind of escape in the pocket and keep the play open that way, but actually using him on design runs to kind of attack the perimeter, read options, and that kind of thing. And so not only did he make the change in personnel at quarterback, he made a change in philosophy on offense. And I'm talking when I say he, Fuente, going against his grain. His grain is to, again, have that more pro-style quarterback. And so when you bring Hooker in, you attack very differently. It's opened the running game up. It's opened the passing game up. You see, when I look at this Virginia Tech offense, you talk about Hooker and his numbers. He started 6 games, but he's finished 5. He got injured in the first half of the Carolina game. They won that game too, but I don't want to attribute that win to him. That was a 6 overtime game. Give that one to Quincy Patterson. If you're going to kind of award a win like you award it to a pitcher, let's give that win to Quincy Patterson. But still, 5-0 as a starter is Hooker. And in those 5 starts, pretty good numbers. 62.7% completion rate, 10 touchdowns, no interceptions, a 179.3 passer rating that if he had enough pass attempts to qualify, he'd lead the ACC in passer rating. He's also running for 45 yards per game on the ground. And they've got a ground game, Deshaun McLeese, Keyshawn King, 2 running backs who would do a good job, 4.2, 4.4 yards to carry, kind of bigger, thicker backs. So they can they're your Mr. Insides. if you want to say, kind of using that old Army terminology, Mr. Inside, Mr. Outside. So McLeese and King will, get you those hard yards up the middle. You got Hooker who can make you be honest on the read option. If he fakes that handoff to, an inside guy or is showing handoff to the inside guy, you have to be aware, if you're a defensive end, that if you crunch down too hard, he might run outside of you. They also use two of their wide receivers, as running in the running game. Trey Turner and Tavian Robinson, and those guys combined 29 attempts this year. They're averaging 11 yards an attempt. So those are 5 weapons that they use in the running game. Then when you talk about getting the ball in the air, Turner and Robertson both with 26 catches. That's the most they've got, 26. So it's not like, they use one guy to get the bulk of their catches. They've got really 6 guys. Damon Hazelton, a guy Virginia fans will remember from last year, 23 catches. Hezekiah Grimsley, another guy we remember from last year, only has 10 catches, but still an important part of the passing game. 2 tight ends, Dalton Keene and James Mitchell. Bringing Hooker into the mix and changing the way you do things, instead of just a traditional quarterback hands the ball off or quarterback stands in the pocket and throws the ball, making the quarterback a running weapon, using those receivers as running weapons, it's really changed the way this Virginia Tech team runs offensively. They can run the ball from 5 different directions. They can pass the ball to 6 different guys. And so this team is hard to defend. And since they've done that, this team has been so much better offensively. Then what that does for you defensively, when you have when you go from sort of being a team that struggles offensively, that means your defense is on the field more. When your offense is controlling the ball more, 2 of their games in the last 5, the Wake Forest game and the Pitt game, not even arguably their 2 biggest wins. They had the ball for over 35 minutes against Wake, over 36 minutes against Pitt. So all of a sudden, your offense is keeping the ball longer periods of time. Your defense is out on the field less, and your defense gets to be better. So I think, honestly, Jerry, even the Bud Foster part of this, I think it all comes down to the decision to go with Hooker at quarterback and the decision to change the way they approach things and go with that more RPO read option style offense, and that's been the key to this turnaround. They're 6-1 in their last 7, a 1-point loss to Notre Dame. They led that game with 30 seconds left. Otherwise, they're 9-2, 7-0 in their last 7.
Yeah, your last sentence there was my first sentence in the response category. We're talking about the 1-point loss at Notre Dame from them having a 7-game winning streak. And you go back to the turning point. It was the Duke game, and the lasting memory I have of the Duke game where Virginia Tech was concerned is offensively, they just looked like they were guessing. And this was right as they were, the quarterback shuffle. You're in a situation to where they were maybe trying to find an identity and go forward with it. And it was kind of amazing because what you're looking at from there, they outscored Miami, and then they doubled up Rhode Island. They edged North Carolina in the crazy one. So then you lose the Notre Dame game. Okay, well, everything's back to normal. But then the next 3-game winning streak, they dismantled Wake, which had been playing incredible football. And then, of course, they whitewashed Georgia Tech. And they did something to Pitt that most people can't do. They outpitted Pitt. You did a nice job of describing the conditions to that game. And the kind of the slop fest they were playing in, but it's not too many teams that are going to take the field against the Pitt Panthers and actually just beat them up. So you're sitting here, you're that 21-20 score at South Bend. If you flip that, again, you mentioned now they're coming in here 9-2. So we're sitting here. We looked at it from the Virginia Tech side. Obviously, they're pretty fired up. Now the question is anybody trying to switch gears and say, hey, maybe this Foster guy can hang around a little bit longer? That would be interesting. But let's look at the other side of it. You were there for the Liberty game. You saw that they put up 55 points. You know that UVA is also at that identical mark of 5-2, 8-3. They probably, you and Scott were mentioning, they probably have at least one woulda, coulda, shoulda game, whether it's the Louisville game or the Miami game. Maybe could have had one more win. But what's the biggest positive? So if I phrase it this way, they're going to break the streak because fill in the blank.
So I'll start by saying one last thought about Virginia Tech is they've had three distinctive mini seasons within this season. Now, the 2-2 start, even the next four games, and I will include the Notre Dame game sort of as the end of that four games, where they went 3-1. They're still getting their feet under them because, you look at the stats of those games. They gave up 563 yards of offense to Miami in that win. They just happened that Miami turned the ball over 5 times. They took advantage, but the offense didn't really. The offense had 334 yards. Just took advantage of really sloppy play by Miami, won the game. So give them credit for winning the game. You look at the Carolina game, kind of a similar thing. Carolina had 491 yards offense. Again, we're still not playing Bud Foster defense there. The offense just kept up with Carolina and won that game in 6 overtimes. Rhode Island was in that mix. That was actually a struggle to beat a team that's not even a very good FCS team. And then the Notre Dame game, the final score was 21-20, but Notre Dame statistically dominated that game. It just, again, very opportunistic Virginia Tech team. Notre Dame was up 14-7 right as we were going into halftime, had the ball at 2nd and goal at the 1-yard line, fumbled it, Tech ran it back for a touchdown. Instead of 21-7, it's 14-14. And that game played out differently in the second half than it would have otherwise. Again, credit to Tech for that, but they're 5-3 at that point, and they're still very much an asterisk 5-3. The last 3, they've been a very good team. They're a legit top 25 team through their last 3. I would say there's a similar sort of trifecta to the UVA season. The first 4 games of the season, Virginia was great, 4-0. They win at Pitt. They beat Florida State. You look at that 4-0 start. Their defense is ranked 2nd in the ACC and top 10 in the country. They're giving up 270 yards a game. They're stout. The offense did just enough. The offense was still figuring itself out. With losses from last year, offensive line losses. Jordan Ellis, the big running back who ran for over 1,000 yards, still trying to replace him. But the offense wasn't asked to do a lot because the defense was that good. Then you lose the Notre Dame game, and that's when things got exposed. That was the second part of the season. You go 4-0 your first part. You go 1-3 second part. The Notre Dame game, you find out, okay, that makeshift offensive line is no longer going to be able to do the job without some changes to the approach. 8 sacks in that game, 6 in the third quarter, 2 of them strip sacks that lead directly to Notre Dame points. 1 returned, 1 set up a first and goal that led to a touchdown a play later. And that game was winnable. Virginia lost that game 35-20, but they outstatted Notre Dame in that game. Arguably, they lost 35-20. Tech lost 21-20. Virginia played them better. It just happened that the score was different, and Tech looked like they played Notre Dame better. But Virginia played them better. It's just, again, you 8 sacks, 2 strip sack fumbles, that lead to touchdowns, and there you go. You lose to Miami, then you lose Bryce Hall in that game. You lose to Louisville in a game that you led at halftime. You turn it over going into score right before halftime, and that game turns around as a result. So you're 1-3. Now all of a sudden you're 5-3. Both UVA and Tech are 5-3 at the same stage, but UVA's 5-3 felt like, oh my God, we're one game away from this season imploding on us, and the pressure's on. Now, and since that point, you're not the same team anymore. You're not the defensive stout team that you were. You're not the number 2 team in the ACC, top 10 in the country defensively. You're holding it together with spit and tape. Without Bryce Hall, without now Brenton Nelson, your starting safety this year, there's a lot of young guys back there that are learning on the fly. Guys who are not expected to be on the 2 deep are now all of a sudden starting in the defensive secondary. And in the last 3 games, this UVA team is giving up 28.7 points a game, 443 yards of offense. This is to opposing teams. That's not the way this Virginia team was structured at the beginning of the season to win games. But also what you could say about this Virginia team, they weren't structured to score 42 points a game and gain 473.3 yards per game as they are offensively the last 3 games. They've won shootouts in the last 3 games. They won 38-31 at North Carolina. They won 33-28 against Georgia Tech, and they 55-27 win over a Liberty team that can move the ball and did. But Virginia, just outpaced them in that game. So your question, Jerry, was how does Virginia win this game? That's more of a schematic question, I think, than anything else. Bud Foster, what he does well and has done well for 30-plus years, the way he plays defense is very distinctive. I kind of liken it to, I'm going to bring Tony Bennett into this mix. Tony Bennett, the pack line defense. It takes away dribble drives. It takes away your post game. If you're going to beat Virginia in basketball, you've got to shoot threes. And if you can make threes, you can beat Virginia. If you can't make threes, you're not going to beat Virginia. If you're going to play Bud Foster defensively, He's going to put 8 guys in the box. He's going to cheat his at least one safety, sometimes both safeties, up in that 5 to 7 yard area known as the box. Take away your run, get pressure on your quarterback. You know going into the game that you're going to have to block at least 5 guys, sometimes 6 or 7 or 8 guys to be able to protect your quarterback, to be able to create running lanes. And what he does, though, then to do that, you've got to put your cornerbacks on an island. They've got to be able to play man coverage, press coverage, and what Bud Foster assumes is I'll take your run away, I'm going to put pressure on your quarterback. If your receivers can get open in the short amount of time you got to get them the ball, good for you, you'll beat me. But I'll take my chances, and more often than not, I'm going to beat you. Think about last year's game now. Last year's game, first half, Virginia tries to run the ball. They try to do what you're supposed to do offensively, mix it up, 50-50 mix pass and run. And I'm losing Jerry here, so I'm going to try to get him back real quick. 50-50 mix pass and run. And last year, Virginia in the first half doesn't score. It was 14-0 Virginia Tech at halftime. And I'm trying to get Jerry back on the phone here. Lost him somehow. And there's Jerry. So last year in the first half, Virginia is down 14-0 at halftime after running a conventional, traditional offense, 50-50 mixed passing and running. And second half, Robert and I takes the blinders off and says, you know what, that's not going to work, and opens it up. And Bryce Perkins throws for 216 yards in the second half, and Virginia scores on 4 straight drives, 75, 75, 75, and 85-yard drive, back-to-back drives. And so if Virginia's going to win this game, it's not going to be 17-14. It's not going to be 14-10. It's going to be 35-34. And the way to win this game for Virginia is to come out. Jerry, you're a guy who would remember this, I bet. I was talking about this with somebody today. Remember, there was a game a few years ago. It's been more than a few years ago now. The New England Patriots playing against the Minnesota Vikings back when the Vikings it was a Monday night game, and the Vikings had the number 1 run defense in the NFL. It was a Monday night game, and you're thinking going in, wow, it's going to be tough for New England. That number 1 run defense for the Vikings is going to really put pressure on them. First half, Tom Brady throws 37 passes. The Patriots don't run the ball once, and the Patriots blow out the Vikings. I think Virginia needs to come out and just say, you know what, whatever with the run. We'll have a running back in there. He's just another blocker. He's another receiver. If we're going to beat Tech, it's not going to be because we're going to get 2 yards on first down running the ball. It's going to be because we trust our receivers to get open one-on-one, and we trust our line to be able to block long enough to allow Bryce Perkins to pick them apart a little bit, kind of like that. And that's exactly what North Carolina did to Virginia. North Carolina, Mac Brown said it after the game. We wanted Bryce Perkins to beat us. We didn't want the running game to beat us. We wanted Bryce Perkins to beat us, and he beat us. Virginia's already played a game like this. Now, Carolina's not the same defensively as Virginia Tech is, but a similar scheme. Virginia's wideouts have to get open. Perkins has to have just enough time to throw the ball to them, and if that's the case, Virginia's going to have to win a shutout. They're not going to win a tight game, low-scoring game. It's going to be a tight game, high-scoring game if Virginia's going to win this game.
Well, you take a look at it, and Perkins has had an incredible stay in Charlottesville, and it's been reduced now to a regular season game, hopefully an ACC championship game, and a bowl game. I'm with you 100%. You gotta, what's the old saying? You gotta ride the horse that brought you here. I would just load Perkins up and say, let's do this. You have to run every so often as a quote-unquote to keep the defense honest. But the ability is Perkins has that ability. It's a situation to where I could see the Cavaliers, trying to run the ball up the middle here and there. But we're on the same page. If they're going to win this game, I think they're going to have to outscore them. And I think that they're going to have to rely heavily on Bryce Perkins to get that done. Now, we just watched, you got to watch in-house, them put up 55 points against Liberty. Again, Liberty's defense, Virginia Tech's defense, different. But what was the key in scoring 55 points last Saturday?
Yeah, they ran the ball well. They ran for 223 yards. This Virginia team has not run well. Going into the game, they were averaging 113.3 yards, last in the ACC. Now they're 13th in the ACC because they had the nice game on Saturday. Now, the last 3 weeks, UVA has run. We talk about Virginia Tech's defense the last 3 weeks and how good they've been. Virginia's offense, everything about this team offensively is the last 3 weeks. So that's kind of what we're going into this weekend. this Friday. Virginia Tech, where they are right now, their last 3 weeks, they've been a defensive team that has been so stout there that the offense has not needed to score the points they've scored just because the defense has been that good. Virginia's offense, they're running for 172 yards a game the last 3 weeks. They're gaining 473.3 per game overall total offense. So they ran the ball great against Liberty, and actually they passed just enough. And really what happened was, they in the second half they sort of wore Liberty down. It's one of those classic games. Liberty is a great team offensively. Hugh Freeze in his first season, Stephen Calvert as a senior quarterback. Antonio Gandy Golden as a senior wide receiver who will play in the NFL next year. They had weapons offensively. Defensively, they just don't have enough numbers now. They don't have enough size. They don't have enough speed. And Virginia had a very simple game plan, executed very effectively. I don't think you'll see anything similar from Virginia this week in terms of the approach to Virginia Tech that you saw out of Liberty. Liberty sat back in the zone in pass defense situations. They left their middle linebacker as a spy. Virginia Tech will just put pressure. Virginia Tech is not going to, mess around with sitting back because I don't think zone is part of their equation. It'd be just like expecting Tony Bennett to have a zone defense. Maybe we can call one play to throw you off, but we don't know how to run it. So Bud Foster's going to put pressure on you with his front four. He's going to send blitzers in. It's going to be linebackers. It's going to be safeties. They're going to be crashing down, trying to take those running lanes away. Basically, again, it's going to have to be Virginia blocking just enough to allow for some quick slants, for some quick outs. If you can block even better, maybe try to go downfield a little bit. But that's what it's going to take. Didn't see much of that out of the Liberty game just because Liberty schematically was so different. But I'm thinking back, and Virginia fans who are listening to this will remember back to the Carolina game. The Carolina game, it seemed like, we were all saying the same thing on social media. Where's this offense been all year long? Well, for the most part, the teams we had been playing to that stage played very soft zone coverages, and Virginia was not able to get enough running game going to soften up the defense that way, and open up opportunities for the passing game. Whereas Carolina just said, we're going to take away your run completely and completely shut you down. Very similar approach as Virginia Tech. Again, not the same athletes, not the same guys who are going to be executing that approach as Virginia Tech has. But that game is sort of the model, if you're thinking as a Virginia fan, how this offense can be. It's going to be Terrell Janet. It's going to be Jesus Dubois. It's going to be Joe Reed. One-on-one matchups with corners, and actually the fact that you're going to use 3 and 4 receivers in most sets. Your third and fourth receiver matched up with backup corners or safeties who God love them, but if you're Virginia and you've got a three-headed monster, and I think those the three starters at receiver in Jana, Dubois, and Reed. I'll take them over anybody in the country. I'll be honest with that. It's not bluster. You give me those 3 guys, and I will move the ball down the field through the air. And if whoever Tech decides is the third of those 3 guys, and whoever Tech decides we're going to put a backup cornerback or a safety one-on-one in coverage, that's where you're going to go. And it's been Terrell Jana of late. Terrell Jana had 16 targets in that Carolina game, caught the ball 13 times. He's been the leading receiver the last 3 weeks overall. So Terrell Jana is going to be key in this matchup, but Dubois with his size, 6'3", 220, and Joe Reed with his speed, key guys. And I'm telling you, that's where this game is going to be from Virginia's standpoint. It's going to be blocking enough for Bryce Perkins to be able to find one of those guys open and throw the ball downfield.
It's going to be interesting to watch, and then the build up to it. Chris, we've talked all year long. We've included the line. The line as of this morning has Virginia Tech as a 2.5-point favorite, even though the game is being played in Charlottesville. Do you think that's just on cosmetically how dominant they've looked in the last 3 weeks? Or would you think that's a valid number for the entire body of work?
I have to wonder. I mean, because Virginia's been just as good the last 3 weeks, offensively. I have to wonder if this is Vegas a bit because they don't like to lose money, so they're going to put a line where they think they're going to make money. I have to wonder if there's some factor in that 2.5 of 15 game winning streak for Virginia Tech, and I talk about this a lot, and it's worth repeating. Again, I know Virginia fans are largely the ones listening to this podcast. The Virginia Tech fans will appreciate this too. 15 years. Let's think about 15 years. 2003, last time Virginia won this game. If you are a junior or senior on either side, you're 20 or 21 years old. 15 years ago, you were 5 or 6 years old when Virginia last won this game. You were in kindergarten or first grade, and that's if you're a junior or senior. The sophomores, the freshmen, they were in preschool the last time Virginia won this game. So let's just put it safe to say that if you grew up a Virginia Tech fan and you're playing on that team now, if you grew up in Hokie Nation, you don't know what it feels like to have lost this game because when you're 5 years old, you're not thinking about that. If you're 3 or 4 years old, you're not thinking about that. Same thing for the Virginia side. If you grew up, thinking, hey, one day maybe I'll play football at UVA, and then now you are, you don't know what it feels like to win this game. And I'm thinking through now to the sidelines, not only just the players, but the coaches. Bud Foster's still there. He vaguely remembers what it feels like on the Tech side to lose to Virginia. It's been a long time, but he remembers 2003. It was in Scott Stadium. It was a very different era. I say this a lot. Think about 2003. There was no Facebook. Facebook wasn't founded until 2004. There was no Twitter. Twitter was 2005. There was no YouTube. YouTube was 2006. That's how long ago it's been since Virginia's won this game. And so there has to be a factor of, the people on the Tech side. They walk into Scott Stadium on Friday morning when they're getting ready to warm up. They're out there running around, catching punts and running their patterns, getting their legs loose and everything else. And they're thinking on their sidelines, boy, something's going to happen during this game and help us win. The ball's going to bounce our way. A ball's going to bounce off some guy's helmet, and we're going to get an interception in the end zone. They're going to drop a pass. They're going to do something. Something's going to happen. Just like last year, Virginia is driving for the winning score in overtime, and Bryce Perkins has a play. He even said it. He told me personally. I asked him a question. Break down that play for me last year in the overtime. And it was a read pass option. He takes a shotgun snap. He fakes the handoff, and he's got a man in the flat wide open. If he gets the ball to Joe Reed walks in the end zone. But he hesitates, does Perkins, and he gets hit and drops the ball. Tech recovers, game over. So that's how close you were. You get rid of the ball, you throw it out there to Joe Reed. It's a touchdown, the streak's over. But things like that happen in this series. And the Virginia Tech people know it's going to happen for them, and the Virginia people know it's going to happen to them. And so I say this a lot. Until Virginia can win this game, they can't win this game. And so it's going to take 85 guys plus the walk-ons plus the coaches plus the support staff plus 60,000 people in the stands to help them win this game. And so I don't blame Vegas for making it 2.5. And it's funny that it's 2.5 in the Vegas numbers for Virginia Tech. You look at the ESPN Football Power Index, the Football Power Index does not account for psychology. Football Power Index looks at your offensive efficiency, your defensive efficiency, your special teams efficiency, and that's measured, by your results, also weighted by the opponents you've played. And it says Virginia has a 64.6% chance of winning. But that's straight up numbers. That's just numbers put into a computer. You put your human naked eye to it, you put your brain to it, and you have to make Tech a favorite because they haven't lost this game since 2003. So I don't fault Vegas for doing that. And until Virginia wins this game, they can't win this game. They have to prove it on the field. And so it would be ridiculous to make Virginia a favorite going into this one.
Hey, Chris, let's make it go personal for a minute. The game is slated to kick off at noon on Friday. And obviously, you've been waiting for this game for a while. The stakes are high. Walk me through Chris Graham's Friday leading up to the noon kick.
Oh, well, I can walk you through Chris Graham's entire week. I am frothing at the mouth right now. I'm ready to tackle somebody. I'm ready to block. I'm ready to go catch a pass. And I've been out of college for 25 years. It's one of those things where, and of course now I got to mention too at this stage, my wife is a Hokie. God love her. She went to the Final Four with me. She wore orange and blue. She roots for UVA every other day of the year. She doesn't root too loud for them on this particular day. She's going to the game now. Of course, we'll sit in different places. I'm in the press box, and she'll be in the stands with a friend. And she says, "Boy, I hate this day," because she's won it for 15 straight years, and she knows that it kills me. This day kills me every year. And this year would be the worst of all of them because, when you're like even last year, it's 7-4, there were no stakes. Virginia wins that game. They're 8-4. I mean, you want to win the game, but now, you're playing for a chance to go to Charlotte. I mean, I have rescheduled my life to be able to go to Charlotte on December 7th. I've already rescheduled things to the point where I'm planning on going to Miami for the Orange Bowl, and so there is that part of it. What else can I say? I've got a pair of shoes here sitting about a foot from me, less than a foot from me, that the last time I wore them fully was on the floor in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the Final Four. I retired them when I got back from Minneapolis. I've put them on once since April 8th, and that would have been October 30th in the 5th inning of the Nats World Series game, down in Game 7, 2-0 in the 5th inning. And they're my lucky shoes, and they worked. Hey, give me credit. Nobody's written about this, but I put the lucky shoes on down 2-0. The Nats win 6-2. So I'm wearing these shoes. I'm wearing these shoes to Scott Stadium on Friday. I'm using everything in my power possible to have positive mojo going into Friday. And I'm probably not alone in that. The UVA fans listening to us right now have their own mojos. They got their own lucky T-shirts, lucky holy underwear, socks that they've been wearing since 1998 or whatever. They, that get big wins for us. I mean, we're all trying to do that because it feels like that, And I'll note one thing that I think is interesting, Jerry, and this, getting away from me but going to Bronco Mendenhall. Last year, there was a thought. Scott German would agree with this, and I'm sure I'll talk with Scott between now and Friday for a podcast. Last year, Bronco Mendenhall came out of the summer saying, we got to beat Tech. There was, the hashtag beat Tech, social media, everything else. There was. We saw it when we in the post-game interview area. When you walk down into the area between the locker room and in the media interview area last year, there was a scoreboard clock running, counting down to kickoff of UVA Virginia Tech. It was that important, and that was what they thought about every second of every day. They ended huddles with beat Tech, everything else. And then they laid that egg, 14-0 down at halftime. And Bronco acknowledged after the game that maybe just maybe we put too much focus on beat Tech and played really tight in that first half. When we came out in the second half, played loose, but we were down 14 points. And that put us in a hole that made it really hard to win that game. After the Liberty game, he was asked several questions by media about the Tech game. And a much different approach from Bronco. Very... Hey, we haven't been successful in this game. It's going to take every bit of effort to win this game. And, a very different approach from Bronco. From last year, all the bluster about we have to beat Tech to, boy, I don't know if we can do it. So interesting in the clubhouse that's the situation. Interesting in the locker room. That's what you're hearing from Bronco, the guy setting the tone. A very humble approach this year as opposed to last year's bluster. I wonder from a psychological standpoint what impact that has, I know what it's done for me. It's made me want to go tackle people even more. So hopefully the guys in the locker room are getting the same message.
Okay, last question from a personal standpoint. What time are you getting up Friday morning to get dressed for the game?
Yeah. That's a hard thing because, this is another part to this story. Virginia football has been down for so long, and we're coming back now. We're 8-3 after winning 8 games last year. So, for some people who weren't Virginia fans, you'd say, down, you're 16-8 in your last 24 games. That's pretty good. But we haven't won this game for 15 years. There was a stretch from the end of the Al Groh era, all the way through the Mike London era, first year of the Bronco era. In fact, the second year of the Bronco era. 10 losing seasons in 12 years. because the second year, even a Bronco, we got to a bowl but lost the game, so we finished 6-7. So 10 losing seasons in 12 years, the fan base is just eroded. The same fan base that you have to turn away from basketball games. This past Saturday, the announced attendance was 37,329. I was told behind the scenes that there were less than 20,000 people actually there. Students were already on Thanksgiving break. They didn't come out in any numbers because of the forecast for rain, which didn't really materialize until after the game. But because of the forecast for rain, a lot of alums didn't come. The fans didn't come. So there were less than 20,000 in the stadium for a 7-3 team that's was 6 days away from playing a game to go to the ACC championship game. That tells you that the fan base is deteriorated. So I say all that to say this: there are going to be 62,000 people at the game on Friday. It has been forever and a day since we've had that many people at a game. It's literally been since the first game of 2008 when we played Southern Cal in the opener of 2008. So our transportation network hasn't been tested quite in 11 years. Our police, the volunteers, the police reserves, they're going to be taxed to the hilt trying to figure out how to direct all this traffic around town. Interstate 64 is going to be bogged down. So I'm thinking I might need to get up around 6 o'clock, Jerry, just so I can get there in time for kickoff, because there are going to be lots of folks driving up 81, 60, coming across 64 from my direction to get there. A lot of folks coming from Richmond, a lot of folks coming down 29 from D.C. and Northern Virginia. This is going to be an occasion, and there's going to be a lot of Tech fans there too. I wouldn't be surprised if there's 10,000 loud Tech fans there. I've already predicted that we're going to, the Virginia offense may very well get at least one motion penalty caused by loud Tech fans. There's going to be a lot of Tech fans there, but it's going to be a lot of fans there in general, and it's going to be a fun day, and I hope it ends the right way. But I'm probably awake already and ready to go. So if that answers the question.
I was sitting here thinking that at 6 a.m. you're already going to be in the parking lot of Scott Stadium. So you're actually showing more control than I thought you might. It's going to be a fun one, and I hope you enjoy every second of it. I got to ask the question, obviously, if Virginia wins the game, I'll hear you from out here. Uh-huh. If they don't win the game, which will be the bigger hit? It was Tech again, or we missed our shot to go to Charlotte?
It was Tech again. We've never been to Charlotte, so I don't know what that feels like. It would be similar to if, it may be similar in one sense, but Syracuse isn't a rival. But, I still say, if you ask me and you've asked me this before, between the UMBC loss in the first round in 2018 in basketball or the 2016 loss to Syracuse in the Elite Eight, the Syracuse loss a million times over. I know for the casual fan, they'd say the UMBC loss, but when Virginia was 8 minutes away from a Final Four, and it would have been at that stage would have been our first Final Four in 32 years, and so that's a different one. I mean, because Syracuse isn't the rival that Virginia Tech is, but we don't know what ACC championship game feels like, and also, there's no championship after that. Like if you beat Clemson in that game, you're not playing for the national championship. You don't play yourself into the playoff. I think that should be something down the road, when the playoff expands eventually. That if a team wins a Power 5 conference, they should be in the playoff. But we're not there yet. So you're still playing for bowl positioning. If you win Saturday and you play Clemson, you're just playing for bowl positioning. It'd be the losing to Tech because, on top of that, I guess, it would make it worse, if you lose to Tech and they get to go, and this was the year you were picked first for the first time ever, and they were picked a distant third. So wrap all that into one. You talk, Jerry, about the casual fans. If we'd have talked to them a few months ago, I don't get out as much as Crystal does. Crystal does all the business work for AFP. I'm usually in the office or on the road doing stories and interviewing people and such like that. She's the one who goes to the post office every day. there was a day back in September when I had to go to the post office and kind of fill in for her. And lo and behold, I ran into a guy who's a Tech alum, big Tech fan, and we were talking about it. And I wasn't gloating. We were 4-0. They were 2-2. He was the one saying, man, you guys are going to go to Charlotte, and we might fire our coach. I'm kind of glad I'm not running into that guy again. His name's Mike, because he might be having fun with me right now, and I wouldn't be able to argue with him. I'm going into Friday thinking – the fan in me says we're going to win the game, but the rational person in me says, if I'm betting on Tech. So it's tough. It's going to be tough. And if Tech wins that game, yeah, God, it's going to suck. You might not hear from me for a while.
The other team, Chris, in the ACC that has a shot to be 9-3, and I'm only bringing this up because I am the bowl junkie. You mentioned that the Orange Bowl gets the pick of the litter. You're in a situation to where if there's a 1-1A, and that's assuming that your Clemson team goes to the playoff. There's a 1-1A, and with the 1A game being the Camping Bowl there in Orlando, and with Notre Dame not in the equation for the playoff, they're in this. Chris, the winner of this game, Virginia Tech, is going to be 9-3. If Wake Forest can take care of business at Syracuse, they're also going to be 9-3. In my mind, Wake Forest is 9-3 is going to fall short of whoever wins Saturday in Charlottesville. Would you agree?
Yeah. And nothing against Wake Forest, but I think they would fall short. I mean, the Bowls want to make money, and so the Virginia fan base can't fill its own stadium up, but actually we traveled pretty well to Charlotte last year. I know that's close. It's relatively close by. It's a 5-hour drive, a 1-hour plane flight. Wake Wake has been to an Orange Bowl, but really small alum base. As a private school, 3,000 undergrads, it's really hard for them to generate those kind of ticket sales. So no, the Virginia Tech winner I think is the favorite amongst that group. I'd feel differently if it was another state school like a Carolina or somebody like that. But no, Wake. And I want Wake to be 9-3. I want as many ACC teams to, that would give us 2 9-3 teams guaranteed after whoever wins Virginia Tech. Just because I'm also an ACC guy. Clemson beat Wake, so if they have a win over a 9-3 team, and then say Clemson has to beat either Virginia Tech and Charlotte, that's another win over a 9-3 team. I can't imagine a scenario where Clemson is undefeated and gets left out of the playoff. But just in case, let's give the CFP folks every opportunity to say these were nice wins, and the more 9-3 teams we have, the better.
I would agree with you there. We have 8 teams that are bowl eligible now. So you got 8 out of the 14. You have 2 teams still with a shot. UNC has to get past NC State to get to 6-6, and Boston College has to get by Pitt. So you have a chance at either 8, 9, or 10 teams getting into the postseason. Because there was one other outcome from last weekend I have to ask you about while we're on the football. And that is, and you actually got to watch part of this, I was just following it on my phone, the Miami-Florida International game.
Uh-huh.
And Florida International was actually calling the University of Miami the University of Coral Gables, saying that they're the real Miami school. Give us some insight on what you were watching there, because Miami season, where Virginia Tech had a lull, they've had a pretty big valley. Miami has been all over the place. What allowed Florida International to beat them this past weekend?
I actually did turn that game on and watch most of the fourth quarter. By the time I turned it on, it was already 23-3. I really don't know. I mean, there was a lot of talk during the game by the announce crew about how, the Florida International kids, for the most part, were Florida kids, especially South Florida kids who dreamed of playing for Miami and didn't get a chance to. So there may have been a chip on their shoulder, but it's okay to have a chip on your shoulder. You have to be good enough to still be able to take advantage of that chip on your shoulder. And what Miami did this year was so interesting in one respect. 3 times this year they were, Was it 3 touchdown favorites in games and they lost? And this being one of them. Another game that they Central Michigan, they were a 3 touchdown favorite and won 17-12. a program that has a lot of talent. Boy, how long have we been saying this about Miami football, and how many coaches have we been saying this about, where they've got all the talent in the world and just can't put it together consistently. They beat Virginia. And yet they lose to Georgia Tech. They lose this game to Florida International. It's hard to figure. All the blame that was put on Mark Richt, all the blame that was put on Al Golden, now Manny Diaz, the savior. It's hard to imagine how, and think about the Tech game. I mentioned they beat Tech, and think about how that game they gained 563 yards, held Tech to 334, and still lost that game. So I wonder. About Miami. I don't know what the issue is, but it's not just one coach. It's not just this group of players. We're talking 10, 12 years back. So, Virginia's got issues. They have a mental block about Virginia Tech. Maybe there's a mental block there with Miami football, despite the fact they have all the talent in the world. They just can't put it together consistently enough to win enough games to justify.
Taking a quick look at the rest of the slate for the ACC on the football side, you're in a situation where half the conference is out of conference playing their bitter rival, if you will. Tell me if there's any of these games that you're going to have Saturday free from a football being at the stadium standpoint. You got the Florida State game, the Georgia Tech game, the Louisville Kentucky game, the Clemson South Carolina game, and then inside of the conference, the best rivalry game you've got is North Carolina NC State. Which one of those games makes Chris say, "Hey, I might be interested in watching that"?
I think the Louisville Kentucky game, just because I've been a fan of Scott Satterfield since I talked with him at the ACC kickoff. I will admit that I left there thinking, I think I said this on a recent podcast. If I had a kid who was a good football player, I'd send him to play with that guy. That guy impressed me with his approach to the game, but. That said, I would not have told you I thought they'd be a win away from an 8-win season this year. And so I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for that program to get that 8th win. It won't be easy. Kentucky 6-5, maybe underperforming to their expectations this year, but that's a good Kentucky team. But that Louisville team has got my attention. I'm rooting for them to get that 8th win. I think that'd be awesome for that program and for him, and it would really validate a lot. About the kind of guy he is, kind of coach he is, character he has, and the character his kids have to overcome the dumpster fire that was this time last year, and to get an 8th win. Even if they go 7-5, honestly, it's been a great turnaround. But I really want to see them go 8-4 and achieve that level. So that's the one. Because Clemson, South Carolina, that's going to be. A joke of a game. No offense to South Carolina, they're just what are they going to do with Bill Muschamp at the end of the season? Unfortunately for them, another coach that they're going to likely have to buy out. The Georgia Tech game. Jeff Collins, God love him, he's done a great job trying to get that thing turned around, but it's hard to imagine them having a really much of a chance to win that game. So, that Louisville Kentucky game really got my attention.
I am really hoping for Louisville to win that game, and again. For coach to stay put. Last time we talked, I mentioned the reference of Willie Taggart. I think anybody that follows football noticed what Satterfield accomplished this year. To take a team that literally just quit and come in there with little time, and whether it's 7-5 or 8-4, they performed well. His name is going to come up in conversations, and I'm really hoping that he's in it for the Cardinals for the long haul, for sure. The other game to mention, it's a rivalry for a different reason. It's the Stolen Bowl when Miami comes back up to Duke to play that game. But yeah, on another football note, first I wanted to ask you, Alabama got a little help this past weekend. When Oregon fell to Herm Edwards in Arizona State. Alabama needed some help. And we went through this with the Cleveland Cavaliers versus the Golden State Warriors. The opportunity for another version of Clemson, Alabama in the postseason. Are you wanting to see that, or are you ready to flip the script?
I'm ready to flip the script, but really, it's as much about the fact that Alabama won't have Tua Tagovailoa as the quarterback. I mean, the backup. If they win their way in, and they have to beat Auburn this weekend just to still stay in position, that could very well happen. But it won't have the same luster if Tua's not there, in my opinion. This would be a second time that Alabama, at least a second time, maybe a third time, that Alabama would have backed its way in to a playoff situation. And actually, it would be the second time with the CFP, and then a third time if you count all the way back before the CFP when they lost to LSU, what was it, 2010, 2011, somewhere around there in the regular season, and then got back in to the back then it was just a one-game playoff, 1 versus 2, because teams ahead of them lost. I don't like that feeling that a team could avoid playing in a conference championship game completely, because they didn't qualify. You're second place in your own division, but you're somehow one of the top 4 teams in the country. But that's very likely to happen, or at least a very likely possibility, because right now, assume Georgia beats Georgia Tech this weekend. They'll go into the SEC championship weekend as a top 4 team, but they'll play LSU. And if Georgia loses that game to LSU, that's a second loss. And Alabama, by virtue of not playing that weekend, is not exposed to a potential second loss. And so, you would think that might give Alabama some cachet with those CFP voters, but just in that matchup, Alabama-Georgia. There's other factors to keep in mind too. Obviously, whatever happens in the ACC championship game, Clemson against either Virginia Tech or Virginia, whatever happens in the Big Ten, of course, Ohio State is in that game. They're playing Michigan this weekend. Assume they beat Michigan, then they likely could very well likely play Minnesota. Does a Minnesota team that wins, if Minnesota were to upset Ohio State, does that knock Ohio State out and Minnesota in, or does it knock both those Big Ten teams out? There's a lot of back and forth there, but Alabama sitting right now at 5, at least as of we're still waiting for tomorrow night and the newest rankings to come out. I can't imagine Alabama won't be 5 in those rankings. With only one game left and no championship game exposure to them. They're kind of sitting there without having to really risk a lot there. And that's not fair, if you ask me. That's what I said earlier. I would love to see it down the road. I've always been an advocate of a 16-game playoff, but if you just went with an 8-game playoff, and the Power 5 champions, the team who wins the conference championship game, is guaranteed a bid, and then you have 3 at-larges. You could guarantee one to the best group of 5 winner, and then have 2 at-larges. Then that could account for a Minnesota being an Ohio State, a Virginia or Virginia Tech beating a Clemson, a team from outside winning in. But that would also put luster on those championship games. Those championship games would then actually be a play-in game to the playoff, and that's kind of how championship games should work. I'd love to see that, but it's not the case. And now, because of the system we have, you have a team that might not even be in a championship game, still getting back in the playoff again. And that, to me, is just that's not sending a good message in college football, in my opinion.
Absolutely spot on. Couldn't agree anymore. Just think about that. Think about the Virginia Tech winner playing Clemson. And if you're telling yourself, if they win the game, they get to go to the playoffs. I mean, Chris, it's one of those answers that's just too obvious. And I think that's what scares people. You're in a situation to where I think it would do wonders for the game. As Saban's already in the politicking mode. He comes out and he says, Auburn's the best team we'll face all year. Someone goes, well, he's throwing shade at LSU. No, he's not. He's trying to play the only card the man has.
Yeah.
Which is to talk up Auburn and then hope that you can, roll over them. I thought that was a great thing. Hey, each time as we finish a podcast, I try to give you an opportunity to enlighten us with your thoughts on something that I look at. And the one I want to pick this time, Chris, that messed with me a little bit. Obviously, you and I talked about the Cleveland Brown-Pittsburgh thing from a couple weeks ago. We talked about how bad of a situation it was. Yesterday, the Cleveland Browns and during their tailgating are in a situation to where a group of fans have made a piñata doll out of the Pittsburgh quarterback without his helmet. They have kids swinging a helmet at the piñata. And if that's not bad enough, somebody, of course, films it and shares it with the world.
Yeah.
I want you to tell me, as we wrap up this one, the football podcast, tell me, what's the worst part of that happening?
Oh my God, the worst part of all that, that it all happened, right? No, the story did get a little deeper. Whatever you want to believe on this, as Myles Garrett has now thrown out the notion that Mason Rudolph used a racial slur. I mean, we knew that Rudolph was trying to pull trying to pull Garrett's helmet off in the middle of that melee, and that's been mentioned as a possible exculpatory factor for Garrett, and that wasn't enough. So he throws the racial epithet part into this, and at least from what we know, nothing exists in terms of audio evidence from any of the field mics that would back that claim up. It's interesting that it wasn't made in the initial moments after or in the heat of the moment afterwards, in the post-game interviews, etc., by either Garrett or any of his teammates. Because you got to think, in my opinion, if Rudolph had said something of that nature, and then Garrett reacted the way he did, you think that would have been like, hey, that's why I did it, because he did this, and I'm sorry I lost my cool, but anyway, that's why I lost my cool. And that not come up a week later when you're trying to defend yourself and you get back in the league. But that said, for fans, I don't want to say that that group of fans represents the entirety of Cleveland Brown fandom. I mean, Cleveland Brown fans have been known for a long, long time. The Dog Pound, there's certainly a very rabid faction of fans that for the longest time, back to Memorial Stadium days, were known for being, very hardy fans. But I can only imagine that if I were a fellow Cleveland Brown fan, I would have been ashamed of those folks. Because it sends a message out, and also these two teams have to play again, and and they play in Pittsburgh, and it's as if you needed any more fuel to the fire. Pittsburgh fans aren't known for necessarily being all that genteel themselves, so that's going to be a tough situation that you're putting your team into, even tougher situation you're putting your team into. And it's just not a good look. And I'm instead of kind of giving a hot take and condemning all Cleveland Browns fans, I'll just say I'm sad. And it kind of goes back to something I was saying with you, Jerry, on a recent podcast about why people maybe don't go to games as much as they used to, why you see attendance down across football stadiums in both college and NFL. It's because people don't like being around those kind of people, and there's too many people like that who go to football games. And it's not just Cleveland Browns fans; it's fans of every NFL team and every college team. There's enough fans of that nature that ruin it for the rest of us. And I'm sure I'll see some of that behavior in Scott Stadium this week, and I hope that I don't, but I know I will. So it's sad. It's sad that people act that way, and it saddens me more than it angers me, I guess.
The last note for me on the rarest of rare football-only podcast, I want to say kudos to Frank Gore, whose current colors he's wearing the Buffalo Bills jersey. Frank Gore, Chris, moved into the third spot on the all-time rushing list in NFL history by passing Barry Sanders. I can still remember Gore back when he was playing for the Miami Hurricane. I thought that was a pretty big achievement. And anybody out there that has positive thoughts and karma and even a prayer, keep Chris Graham in mind this week leading up to Friday at noon. He's going to need it.
Yeah, and also if you have anything that could serve as a kind of medicine that will calm me down, that's the biggest thing. My psyche's great. It's just I need to slow it down a bit. So that'll be the thing as far as that goes. But I'm having fun. This is the week. Every year, I've lost this game for 15 straight years, but this is the week that from a sports fan perspective makes it all turn around. So So thank you, Jerry Carter, for your help on this podcast. Thank you for our listeners out there. Hopefully we got you ready for the Virginia Tech game. And just calm down between now and Friday if you're a Virginia fan. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.